So thank you, Paloma and Robbie, for organizing us today. Today we're in a speculative studio, and I see that our guest, Beatie Wolf, is in her music studio. Welcome, Beatie.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Wonderful to be joining you guys.
I am so excited, and I had a big long introduction to Beatie, all prepared, and then I realized that the Barbican did it beautifully in a video. So as we settle in for our 1 hour conversation, I'd like to share that video introduction with you, and then we'll turn it over to Beatie, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end for us to ask questions and share conversation about the work you're going to see today. So prepare to be pretty blown away and inspired. And I will share my screen. I will do that Zoom thing where I say, can everyone see the video? And I will start to play.
I'm Beatie Wolf. I'm a musician, a songwriter, and I love to create tangible formats for my albums. When I was about 7 or 8, I discovered my parents' record collection. I just saw opening these records up as kind of like entering into the worlds of these albums, and that was the gateway into this world. I just couldn't accept that my albums wouldn't have these worlds. Instead, they would just be these kind of intangible experiences floating around somewhere. And so I was just determined to create a tangible album, but for this digital age. This was the first innovation, and the idea with this was to kind of turn your phone into a magic box, like the sort of 80s viewfinder.
You know, Raw Space, I haven't talked about how it worked in terms of the experience of the actual Antistream, so I could mention that. And then the space broadcast.
Yes, please stop.
Oh God. Oh man, it's like, give me the energy.
Giant antennas, like monstrous eyes and ears, straining, watching.
Like, how do you then create something that triggers a different pathway, you know, kind of being a kid and excited about uncovering this thing? And that's what I'm always trying to do with these vinyl experiences. If we were still as excited about albums as I was when I was 8, I wouldn't be doing any of the tech stuff. I want people to remember why they love music and realize that they can still have that with music today. You know, I believe we have to keep the bar high. We have to keep on making the best art possible.
My fingers are so cold. Oh my God.
So with that, I would like to pass it over to Beatie. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure. And yeah, that you know, that definitely gives a flavor of what I do, but I think it's always so much easier to kind of really take people through it, you know, from where it began and I guess where it's gone today, because you know, really so much of it was just following what I was curious about and what I was passionate about, which from a very young age was, you know, as you guys saw, the discovery of my parents' record collection, which I, already being a big story lover, just saw as the perfect way of telling these stories. You know, you had a musical book that you could open up and it would take you onto the world of the album, and there was a ceremony to that experience. And I spent all of my childhood pretty much just, you know, imagining what kind of worlds I could create for my albums. And music was obviously at the core of that, but it was not just music, it was design, it was, you know, technology, even with some of those records and the production. You know, it was obviously imagination, creativity, but it sort of had all these different layers to it. And, you know, you really had a physical art form beyond, you know, the audio art form. So, you know, around the time that we moved, you know, from physical to digital, and that obviously wasn't just records, it was tapes, it was CDs, it was the poor mini disc, which never really quite made it. But, you know, as someone that was just so connected with that physical art form, and had spent so much time sort of imagining what that would be like for me. You know, when we moved from physical to digital, I felt we lost so much in that process. And I kind of identified those three things which were really fundamental to the experience of absorbing something deeply. So it went in a way that, you know, it became a part of you, a part of your DNA, something you could always remember. I kind of identified those three things as ceremony, tangibility, and storytelling. And with those three components, those three aspects, whether it was an album or a book or a painting, it didn't have to be just music, but you as, you know, the listener or the audience or the kind of experiencer really had this sort of fully immersive experience that went in very deeply. And then obviously we moved to digital and everything was suddenly floating around in this intangible sphere, sort of hitting our sensory inputs at this same frequency, along with news, social media, you know, calendar alerts. Like everything had been kind of, everything now really exists in that space a lot of the time, and we're bombarded with it, and music had become part of that background noise. And so I felt like there had to be a way to think differently about it, and there had to be a way of taking the best of the old, you know, the best of that physical experience, the ceremony, the tangibility, the storytelling, and combining it with the best of the digital one, and creating something that people hadn't experienced before, but which felt nostalgic, but also felt new and exciting. And I guess I first had that thought about 10 years ago, or just over 10 years ago. And I thought it was the most obvious thing. I thought, well, every artist is going to be thinking the same thing, and everyone will be doing weird, you know, new formats. It just didn't occur to me that it was, you know, unusual or unique to me in the sense of back when I was thinking about that. And, you know, the first innovation was this theater for the palm of the hand, which you know, you saw in the trailer, very simply taking the idea that, okay, now everyone's on their phone and this is how we're experiencing music. Can you turn the phone into a magic box? You know, can you slot it into something which suddenly opens up this sort of holographic viewfinder space, you know, where people can experience this album in this very kind of retro future way. And, you know, that was at the time, that was sort of my first and only thought about doing anything in this new area. And, you know, the response to that was wonderful. And I sort of thought, okay, well, I kind of want to take this further. And, you know, for the second record with the album jacket, thinking about the album jacket as being such a core component that we missed when we moved from physical to digital, because the album jacket was a work of art in its own right. I sort of very serendipitously ended up with the tailor who dressed Bowie, Hendrix, and Jagger, who lived in this house where McCartney had written Eleanor Rigby, Hendrix had written The Wind Cries Mary, in the most magical sort of secret flat in London. And, you know, he was telling me about the history of the room and saying, oh, this, you know, this was where Yoko and Lennon did their double Virgins cover and got naked. And this is where Hendrix, you know, wrote The Wind Cries Mary and then got evicted by Ringo after whitewashing the walls when he was high on acid. And just, you know, this incredible history. And it was all in this one room. And the sort of resonance of that space and the magic and the sense of like these multidisciplines, you know, here was this tailor who dressed all these wonderful artists, but it was also this house that culturally had so much history and art and kind of echoes of the past. And so thinking about the album jacket, I thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if, you know, I recorded the record in this room, the new album in this room, and with all of that resonance and all of that history, that was then translated into a woven fabric, you know, where the music was actually woven into this fabric and then cut by this tailor who dressed all these same people, as kind of the ultimate album jacket, you know, the ultimate reimagining of the album jacket. And, you know, that to me felt like a kind of wonderful celebration of that part of the record that we'd lost. And then around the same time, I realized, well, that can only ever be one of one. You know, this has to be a sort of high art piece. So how can I create something for everyone, like the app, like the 3D interactive, you know, theater for the palm of your hand. And so around that time, I was sort of having a conversation with a company that had just come out with paper, NFC enabled paper. And they were thinking of, you know, business cards would be really exciting if people would get really excited about an NFC enabled business card. And as the guy was sort of talking to me, all I could see was like a little box set of vinyl, you know, that you could open up, and you had a slide for each track of the album with the artwork and the liner notes and NFC embedded, and you could tap that card to your phone and it would bring up all the content associated with that track and the lyrics. And so that was how I came up with this idea for creating this NFC album deck of cards, which kind of looked like a cassette tape. Again, it was a tangible object, but you know, you tapped those cards to your phone and it opened up this whole world with sort of secret content around each of the tracks and, you know, each of the sort of, every part of the record. So, you know, I'm taking you through this just to give you a sense of sort of the various projects, and each one has a sort of its own long form story. But this was around still the time when iTunes was prevalent. We hadn't really moved into streaming. And then we moved into streaming, and I thought, wow, we've lost even more of the stuff that I loved. And if this is streaming on the one hand, like what would that anti-stream look like? Like what could that antithesis of our streaming experience be? And just as I was thinking about that, I happened to be at Bell Labs, you know, the great engineers who invented the telephone and the transistor and so many things. And we were working on a separate project together. And, you know, one of the engineers said, hey, do you want to come into, you know, what was the quietest room on earth for many decades? And a lot of the engineers can't stay in there too long because they freak out, that you hear the blood rushing through your veins. And I went in there expecting to have that same response, and instead just felt completely peaceful and calm. And you realize how much noise, you know, we have around us all the time, and how we're so uncomfortable with silence. And this chamber, this anti-echo chamber, immediately connected in my mind as the sort of perfect place to stage the anti-stream from, as it was the ultimate room of listening. You know, it was the place where Helen Keller experienced silence for the first time. So, you know, for my last record, which was in 2017, the idea was to create a anti-stream that ran, you know, 24 hours a day for a week, with a physical record player playing the album on repeat, you know, 24 hours a day, live 360, streaming that to YouTube. It was the first live 360 video, but then also it was the first live 360 AR experience, because on top of that, you know, video of what would otherwise be a lonely turntable playing this album in this world's quietest room, which people could obviously explore in 360. There was an AR overlay, you know, live animations, which sort of rose out of the vinyl in real time. The lyrics streamed out of the record, the artwork surrounded you and blended with that real environment, taking you into the visual landscape of each song as it was playing in real time. So it was this sort of ultimate Fantasia experience, and, you know, technologically a first on many fronts. But I was sort of very happy to, in some ways, see that people didn't really realize it was so technologically advanced, because it felt so nostalgic, it felt so familiar, it felt so sort of magical and inclusive. And, you know, and I think that for me is very key. Like, the technology always has to be in the background. It always has to be facilitating a deeper, richer experience. You know, it has to be in service to the art, like not the other way around. And so that was the Raw Space project. And then, you know, just to kind of finish that story off in some ways, I ended up having a conversation with the Nobel laureate, who, using the horn antenna, the Hondel horn antenna, picked up cosmic microwave radiation and proved the validity of the Big Bang Theory, and won a Nobel Prize for that. And he and I were meeting in front of the horn antenna, no plans to do anything together, very spontaneously. I just wanted to have a conversation with him and ask him a few questions. And, you know, as we were chatting, I said, well, you've used this to receive, but have you ever used it to transmit? And he was like, no. I was like, well, in theory, could you send, you know, I have this album called Raw Space. It wasn't based on space. It was based on this raw chamber environment, but wouldn't it be cool to maybe send it up using this horn antenna, you know, thinking that was going to go nowhere. And he was like, no, because the sound waves will get to a point in the Earth's atmosphere and then they'll stop. And, you know, he went away, and we sort of said goodbye. And a month later, I get an email from him saying, you know, BT, I figured it out, and I can do an update on the horn, and we can do that space broadcast if you want to do it. You know, and this is a national historic landmark, and he's, you know, in his 80s, this kind of amazing astronomer, you know, not physician, you know, physics, whatever the term is for someone who works in physics. I'm sorry, totally blanked on that. But, you know, no part of that did there was no part of me that expected that to happen. And so that was this wonderful, very serendipitous kind of surprise. And we just had a lot of fun doing it. And every now and then he'll update me where the music would be traveling. And so, you know, through the course of those projects, you know, and then I'm just going to come to the environmental project, and then we'll show a trailer for that. But the intention was always to, I don't know, really remind people of the value of music and art for humanity, because it goes very deep. You know, it's not something that's just entertainment. It's something that's so core to our humanity. And when you've seen what music and art can do neurologically, you know, for people with all different conditions, from autism to Parkinson's to schizophrenia, you really have a deep, profound respect for it. And, you know, I feel like what we've gained technologically, we've also lost in a lot of ways artistically. And I've been very conscious to try and, you know, keep those things that I love in the mix as much as possible. But also not be, you know, not have the shutters up when it comes to like, oh, I'm X, so that I should stay in this box. But, you know, really allow the curiosity and the sort of the spontaneity to lead me into these places that end up, you know, encompassing science and health and technology and design and all these other different mediums, and also allow me to work with very different types of people. And so it was sort of through this that I came to this latest project, which I'm going to be showing at COP26, the UN Climate Summit, in quite a major way. It's a translation of 800,000 years of historic CO2 data from NASA, which is charting CO2, you know, rising CO2 levels, but translated into this woven timeline of our planet, specifically highlighting human impact, which began as a song I wrote 15 years ago after seeing An Inconvenient Truth, and just I couldn't believe where we were, and wrote this track called From Green to Red, which I thought, you know, I won't need to record because everyone will see this film and we'll be on a completely different path. And obviously that didn't happen. So then 2 years ago, when I was sharing my work at JPL, one of the chief engineers of NASA came up afterwards and said, look, you know, I want to show you these climate graphs. And I had that same moment of just, you know, what the hell, how are we here? And so realizing that for so many people, data is something they can't see, you know, big data particularly, and climate change is something we literally cannot get our head around, because it's so vast and it's made up of so many small micro changes, and it isn't happening to us right here, right now, even though it is now very much, and we cannot ignore it. So I thought, well, how can you take data that is for so many people kind of, you know, they're closed off to it, it's in another room, and turn it into something that they feel and they can relate to, and basically giving people, anyone from a kid to an elderly person, a sense of where we are on the planet right now. And so I think we have just a trailer for that project.
Shall we watch the trailer?
Yeah.
And then maybe later we can also look at how you built it into an interactive installation. So with that, I'm going to do the screen share one more time. And this is From Green to Red.
Outside, the people like cars are still running. When inside, it's safe to deny that it's coming. The TV's turned up, so the winds are just humming to the sound of the heat rising. We don't want to hear that the problem is us, so we live like we want in our own universe. 'Cause man thinks he's God in a devilish way. We're too proud to see what we won't even say. We don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. No, we don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. So take my hand, babe, and I'll walk you to school, where you'll learn how to live by a new set of rules. 'Cause we played all our cards, but none left for you. Forgive us, my dear, can't you see? It's the truth that we don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. No, we don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. What happened to love? Is it out of date? Turn back, there's so much here to say. What happened to love? Is it out of date? Turn back, there's so much here to say. Turn back.
BD, when we're on Zoom, you can't hear the audience applaud and let you know how exquisite and beautiful and moving your work is. Thank you.
That's so lovely.
It's true, you can. When we talk about what is lost when we move medium, this is one of those moments where I feel it quite acutely, because I have heard you perform and play and collaborate in real space. So thank you.
Well, no, thank you. And yeah, so that was really the trailer for the project, which then became this full length, so full length being to the track, because that was like a 2-minute version, just to give people a sense of what it was. And then it evolved into this interactive installation that was installed at the London Design Biennale, where people could move their hand over the fabric to pull out the specific, carbon ppm and the planetary timeline date. But it was wonderful, because that was obviously very much inspired by An Inconvenient Truth at its core. And also, David Attenborough is someone who's just added so much awareness and has given so much to this planet. And I got the opportunity to speak and show that project and perform directly after both of those people at the Nobel Prize Summit quite recently. And yeah, I guess I feel like, for a long time, if I had to define what I was doing, which is always kind of impossible, because it ends up being in all these different spaces, I'd just say, well, I want to remind people of the value of art for our humanity. But alongside that was always nature. It was always the environment. And now I think more than ever, we have to do whatever we can, in whatever ways we can, to be part of this shift, which is so overdue. So a project like this is just very, I have endless passion and energy, and anything I can do in this particular space. I'm separately working on a series of eco documentaries telling the story of the disappearance of the kelp forest in abalone from the west coast shores, and why that's occurred, and how we can rewild, how NOAA is doing an initiative to rewild that. And then also rethinking the urban landscape, planting the right trees in the right locations that then, instead of becoming tinder, because when you burn the wood, all the carbon goes back into the atmosphere, the wood becomes guitars or houses. And, it just requires a little more thinking on our part, a little more effort. But, we really have to, we really have to start seeing our blind spots, I think.
Shall we take a look at the installation at the London Design Biennale?
Sure.
Outside, the people like cars are still running, when inside it's safe to deny that it's coming. The TV's turned up, so the winds are just humming to the sound of the heat rising. We don't want to hear that the problem is us, so we live like we want in our own universe. 'Cause man thinks he's God in a devilish way. We're too proud to see what we won't even say. We don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know. No, we don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know, don't want to know.
Back to the story.
Back to the story.
Yeah, about what happens after this.
Oh, what happens after this? You mean with this project or in general?
Yes. Well, with this project, and then
so it will be going on to COP26, where it will be installed in the New York Times Climate Hub. I'll be speaking and performing there, and then it will also be projected onto the Armadillo building, Norman Foster's Armadillo building, where the whole conference is being held. So 110 feet, tall and wide, which will be amazing. And then I'll be doing, a few main stage performances and speaking about it. So it will have a lot of activity at COP, for sure.
Excited to see that. I was going to hand it back over to you. I have some other video with the space beam, but I wondered if you wanted to continue presenting the arc before we get to space beam video.
Absolutely, yeah. So the space beam video, which obviously I mentioned, that was sort of in some ways, the tail end of this raw space project. And, directly after that, I was asked to show my work at the Victoria and Albert Museum as a series of, actually to present all of the projects. So there's the series of these designs that I'd made, and working with the, Bowie is curatorial team. So the team that did the Bowie show. And I really couldn't believe it. I mean, I can't believe most of it. It's like so much about just what I am passionate about. And I think, maybe my dad and, some friends will see a project, but then it often has kind of a wonderful reception I'm not expecting. And so to have an exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which was my favorite museum, working with the team that did my favorite show, was so wonderful, because it allowed me to show how, even though the outputs are very different, the intention is the same. The thread of what you're continually exploring is the same. And for that, realizing that I wanted to take people back into the raw space experience, the live 360 AR experience, but not using headsets, because I hate headsets. And I hated headsets even, you know, back then when I was trying to figure this out. I just never got them. I never saw why people would really want to put something over their head in that way. So I was sort of thinking, is there another way? Again, is there another way of doing this? And I came up with an idea to create a mylar wrapped anechoic space chamber, which reflected, you know, the sort of space aspect of this project, but where they could go in, people could go in and experience that silence in the middle of the V&A, and using an old coin operated viewport, you know, the kind you look out to see, like the old binoculars, but repurposed, refitted, you know, that essentially became a headset. So people could watch the record playing in the room and with the lyrics streaming out of the vinyl and the artwork coming to life. And that for me was so much more magical, because it allowed families to do it together. And, you know, there was this whole sort of shared experience, and it also made it much more inclusive, you know, because I think a lot of the time, again, if technology is sort of, you know, if it becomes a kind of exclusive thing, or it becomes for certain people, I'm kind of not a big fan of that. I think, you know, use it in a way where it's immediate, you know, it brings something to life in an immediate way that's accessible for everyone. So yeah, that was the V&A exhibition, and that was the space chamber, which, you know, I kind of lament about sometimes, because it, you know, we ended up having to sort of dismantle it and give it away. And I kind of wish it existed here in LA and I could just pop in there and, you know, have a moment of quiet and watch it come to life again, because it was really magical. But VR headsets are much easier than making a space chamber. So
I believe you. So I actually have a question before we go on to watch that video. And I was struck when we first started this conversation last week around how when you learn to play an instrument, guitar, you learn to be familiar with your own voice. It's like an instrumentation and it extends into space, right? And I was wondering, how do you approach emerging and technologies that are new to you, right? New instruments, new tools and practices. Because the two things I'm really struck by are when you say, like, I couldn't accept that my albums wouldn't have this world. Like, I'm going to accept, it's that kind of determination. And then this kind of radical collaboration with incredible people. And I just wondered if you could share a little bit about how do you approach the technologies, the collaboration with this intent that you hold at the center?
It's a great question, Maggie. I think it's sometimes so hard to really articulate, because with every project, it's so totally different. There's never the thing that I found is there's never a real blueprint. You know, I think a lot of companies or artist teams or whatever, they'll have, you know, okay, we did this once and this worked, so we'll do it again. And with everyone, it's been like creating a whole new roadmap that also was never part of my plan. It's a funny thing to say, but, you know, when I, for example, with Raw Space, I was actually working on a music dementia research project. I wasn't at all thinking about, you know, what ended up happening, but it was, I guess, a big part of it is situational, in the sense of, you know, by being at Montague Square with the tailor and him telling me the history and sort of feeling this incredible resonance of this space and thinking about this album jacket and thinking, like, what would the ultimate album jacket experience be? And it's clearly could be born out of this room and with this tailor, and, you know, it's almost, and then being at Bell Labs and thinking about the Antistream, and then going into this anti-echo chamber and realizing, oh, the Antistream's perfect room is here because it's ceremonial rather than, you know, 24-hour shuffle. And then building it from there, where you're thinking, okay, so you've got the space, you've got this room, you've got the physical player, which again grounds any AR experience in reality. I think it's really important the reason I was never really into VR particularly was because I think it needs to be grounded in reality. I think then it's much more powerful, it's much more exciting. So having this real room, this real environment, this real record player, and that, you know, if the needle skipped, then everything would skip basically. And, you know, there was a time where the stream got stuck in like this matrix for like a day. And, you know, it was imperfect, it was experimental, it was raw, and you had those raw components. But then when I think about opening up Abbey Road as a kid, you know, it was this Fantasia experience where the lyrics were coming out and the artwork was coming out. Everything was sort of, you were immersed in this world. So then using AR very specifically with that intent of, oh, let's make this as the record's playing, let's recreate that feeling I had where the lyrics are streaming out and, you know, they're surrounding you, and all of the kind of the artwork of that song is being brought to life in real time. And so I think when you have that real clear intention and you know why you're doing something, really, really key is, you know why you're doing it. And then it's like you pull each layer in, you know, you just, oh yeah, this resonates with that story, this resonates, and you let the story kind of lead what becomes a part of it. And, you know, within that project, I had some of the best engineers, some of the smartest engineers telling me, you know, oh, we should do an ambisonic component, and, you know, we can have it spatialized and everything. And I would end up having to say no, you know, even when you've got these incredibly smart people that are like, we want to do this, show off this, you know, this component. And there were many times when it was as important, it was in some ways more important about what you said no to than what you said yes to. Because, you know, my dad always used to say this this quote to me, and I thought he'd made it up, and I thought it was a joke, and, you know, he'd never really explain it to me. And then when I got older, he finally sort of, you know, revealed the mystery, and it was this Swabian expression that he just for some reason liked and told me and would, you know, share with me. And the expression was, the eye of the farmer fattens the pig. Now it sounds very like agricultural, but actually the magic of it, because it's now become one of my go-to, you know, one of the things I live by, is if it's your pig, you're going to see things that no one else is going to see. And you can have the smartest people on the planet, you know, working with you on a project. But if it doesn't resonate with you, if it's your vision and something, even though it's a brilliant idea, it just doesn't connect with what you're trying to do, it's really important to be able to say no. And I guess I never had that fear of saying no because I cared so much about the work beyond me. It wasn't about me. It was about the work getting realized in the way I felt it needed to be realized, that I, luckily didn't have much, you know, nervousness about just saying, no, I think, you know, this is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And I feel that's really quite, you know, I think that's been a big part of also the compass of, you know, how one is guided through these sort of micro decisions, is ultimately, is it going to help you realize that vision? Does it feel like it rings true? And it doesn't matter if it's the most brilliant bit of technology or innovation or, you know, anything that's been done for the sake of being done, rather than you can really explain why that is there, why that emerging technology is there, or what it's doing, and often you don't even need to explain it because it's facilitating something that people feel. So it doesn't even need, it feels integrated. It's the difference between something feeling like it's being bolted on and something feeling like it's fully integrated.
Yeah. And it feels kind of inevitable at that point, right? I'm thinking, I'd heard that phrase, but I really like it. The eye of the farmer fattens the pig. I kind of say to myself pretty often, what you focus on grows. So you need to be really intentional where you direct your attention, because that's what will grow.
Absolutely.
And I noticed that this ability to collaborate is basically being a learner in this space of somebody else who can tell you this is what they're expert at, but it's part of the creative task to help formulate a story that makes sense to the collaborator. So they understand the no, and they also understand the area where you're saying, please try. It's just something I have in my head, but please try. So I think that's a real, it's a skill, it's a practice. And I think it's something that I see moving from work to work. I wanted to, before we opened it up to everyone else, I wanted to see if you thought it was still timely to play Space Beam.
Oh,
if
sure.
you think, or if you'd rather continue to talk and take questions.
No, we can play
because one of the things in Space Beams that I really love is the actual opportunity to hear Bob Wilson talking about kind of creativity and making and the technologies that enabled the kind of experimentation and discovery that fueled him. I find it quite compelling in this part of the conversation. So I will just share my screen again. And I would also ask everyone who's out there in our Zoom space behind their cards to pop in a question or a comment or something that resonates with you in this conversation.
The place, a hilltop in New Jersey. The setting, giant antennas like monstrous eyes and ears, straining,
Do we have sound?
watching, waiting.
And now, 50 years on, this historic horn will be used for the first time to beam music into space. My latest record, Raw Space. Should we do it together? 1, 2, 3.
So here we are, we're in front of the Holmdel horn antenna, which was used to prove the validity of the Big Bang Theory, won the scientists a Nobel Prize. What's so exciting about Raw Space is not only will we be creating the first fully augmented reality 360 album stream, but we'll also be the first to beam an album into space via this horn antenna.
Today they are looking, as all humanity looks, to the vast potentials of outer space.
At first, I was perplexed how to do something like this, but as I thought about it, I started having ideas. We all know radio. If we could modulate the sound on a microwave carrier, it could go through the horn and go up into space.
So what do we have here? It's a fancy radio that shows what we're transmitting. And if you look at the screen, there's this big spike, and that's the radio signal that's carrying your music. Oh, we can listen.
Here we are, 1, 2, 3.
And so when we turn the antenna up, that signal will be the one heading up into space.
Okay, well, should we do that now?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's do it.
But, you know, it's amazing how when things are made well, they last. Just like music, folks.
So this is the end of the horn where we can connect to either a signal source or a receiver. Right now, we have a radiator in there that can radiate microwaves and a speaker, which can broadcast sound. It comes out of this horn up to the surface up there, which is a piece of a paraboloid, sort of like a little piece of the reflector of your flashlight or something. Then it makes it into a signal that's going pretty much in one direction, into space.
Well, maybe at this hour, it will go past the planet Venus on its way out of the solar system.
I love creating worlds for each of my albums, and sending this one into space makes it truly universal. Well, I guess it's time to start the broadcast.
Okay.
Should we do it together? 1, 2, 3.
Hello,
this is BTS Wolf, and this is the Raw Space.
Yeah!
Multiverse broadcast, coming to you from the rawest recording space on the planet and transmitting into the rawest space outside the planet.
Thank you. Sana is asking, can we send music to the bottom of the Mariana Trench? I think.
Yeah, you know, we know a lot more about, we're a lot more interested in, you know, space than we are in our oceans, and we know more about the surface of the moon than we do the bottom of the ocean. And yeah, I definitely feel we need to be less space focused and more our planet focused. But what was lovely with that was we weren't sending anything physical up. You know, I think we need to leave sending stuff into space, like leave it alone. And all the billionaire space race just makes me want to throw up. So
yeah, you know, there's also a billionaire race to the Mariana Trench as well.
Yeah.
Something I'm struck by though is that when we do, if anybody's had the opportunity to scuba dive or be underwater for any length of time, there's a lot of sound down there. There are a lot of noise emitting creatures, animals, living worlds that I wondered that are different when you would go into space, right?
Totally. No, totally. I think, you know, we just also for so long have been so unaware of the impact we've had because the oceans have, you know, absorbed so much CO2. And, you know, and because you can't see it, again, it's this perfect thing where if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And, you know, learning about the 95% disappearance of the sea kelp along the West Coast, and it's not just California, it's happening, you know, all over the planet. That's major. You know, that's one of the ocean's most effective carbon capturing systems, and we're down to 5%. So yeah, I feel very, you know, I feel very passionately that we need to just be more, we need to activate more awareness, you know, however we can.
It is. So I wanted to turn to some of the questions or some of the thoughts that are coming in, and feel free to shout out or put your message, your thoughts in the chat. Eric Schubert, who's an MDP, is commenting on how this makes him think about physicists looking at foundational gravitational waves like music, and also thinking more about your work with people who live with dementia. And I think this speaks to where in the amygdala music reaches us, but also going out into space is how. Right?
Yeah, and you know, I think we know it's fascinating because we really know so little about music and the brain, and it's almost a great analogy. You know, we know as little about music in the brain as we do about our oceans, but it does miraculous things. And I've seen so many of those, you know, transformations. And I think when you've seen, you know, someone who's catatonic getting up and dancing, or someone who's nonverbal singing along with these songs they've never heard, it's so powerful, and it really, really cements that realization that, you know, art is so fundamental to us, and art can be many things. It's not rigid, it's not defined, it's not small, it's so much of what keeps us alive, as is the natural world, like literally, but also as kind of the greatest inspiration and imagination and technology. The thing I think so crazy is nature has our best technology. All we need to do is start modeling our brilliant innovations on nature in terms of, you know, how we're going to start addressing this climate crisis. But human beings are they're so narcissistic, and they think, you know, well, we'll invent something that's better than a tree, or, you know, better than just looking at what already has survived for millions of years with, you know, this understanding of interconnectedness, which I think we see ourselves as very apart from everything else.
Yeah, I'm struck by when music is one of those, as you were saying it, it's one of those ways that humans shift into one another's, literally into their biome and into their person. And I'm struck by how we often think of like somehow nature is there, nature is behind me, I'm going into nature, as opposed I am with that. Right, and therefore what is the appropriate way to be in that nature? And I'm concerned, I've worked in technology for a long time, that we've got this techno-determinism, that issues and what do we do when we see our carbon offset is we create a carbon offset market. We call it a market, and then we create more technology to somehow de-design what was done by design, right? So I'm really curious to hear from other people. I know most of the people in the call here are designers, artists. To hear from you, what are some of the ways of working with technology that you're interested in now?
Oh, are you talking to me?
Yeah, to you, and to also from some of that's my question to you. I'm sorry. Is my question to you, Beatie, is like what are some of the technologies that you're interested in working with at this time? And then to also hear more from some of our listeners and students.
Honestly, Maggie, I wish I had like a better answer for you, but because it's never tech led, it's almost always the last part once the project and the story, the narrative and the other key ingredients are there. And then I'm thinking, okay, what's the sort of magic dust, what's that thing to really make something that's otherwise quite familiar and feel new. So I mean, one of the projects I am working on, which I've been working on for a while, which was meant to be at the Art Institute in Chicago as an installation 2 years ago. And then, it was right around the time COVID. So it was in like, it was just when all of that kicked off. And it was a way of presenting a record as a secret communication system using code pioneered by Hedy Lamarr in World War II, which was frequency hopping code, to sort of essentially create this, scrambled signal experience where people would walk around a space discovering, the different parts of this album, I guess, but it was sort of beyond an album. But then also leaving their own messages, which would die out and get replaced with new ones. And so, that was all mapped out. I don't know if you saw, but in the Barbican trailer, there's a section where I'm using chalk to draw a sort of grid. So that was 88 frequencies. And that's still happening. We're just obviously figuring out different practical logistics because of COVID. But, I felt very inspired by, I guess, a big part of also the things I love are, discovering the Bell Labs anechoic chamber, discovering the horn antenna, these things that I feel are hidden in plain sight, which no one knows about, and this was the room where Helen Keller experienced silence for the first time. And this was the horn antenna that picked up the sound at the birth of our universe. And yet these incredible spaces or instruments or people are kind of not really known, or not really seen in the way that I think they should be seen and celebrated. So I love working with a project that's also shining a light on what I feel are really wonderful people, innovations, discoveries, and that becomes part of that story. And I think Hedy Lamarr is obviously one of those people that very few knew the extent of her genius,
I also have a question here from Robbie asking that as your practice has evolved, has the way you describe your work and your audience changed?
Yeah, definitely. I think I used to have to tell people every part of the story, you know, because even with like the musical jacket, that alone is like a 30-minute story of how it happened and all the different components and the serendipity and the troubles and the, you know, and I used to feel that everyone had to know like all the nuances because they were so wonderful. Well, in my opinion, they were so wonderful because they added to the magic and they added to the layers. And but then I realized that actually the more one can say less, you know, and just step back and let the work not even speak for itself, but just let people come at it in whatever way they want to. And I don't know, just taking more of a stance of like space and sort of not having to say every last detail and not having to make sure everyone understands everything, and just letting it be. I think that's definitely been a big change, and it's felt really good, you know, because you could explain something with every nuance that is special to you and someone's still going to interpret it the way they want. So I feel like kind of taking a leaf out of Jim Henson's book and just trying to keep things as simple as possible, even though the work is obviously not simple.
He will be nodding. We're also just coming up to the end of our time together. Is that the case, Robbie? So I wanted to ask our students, faculty, friends to just join me in thanking Beatie. It's always inspiring, and I'm remembering ceremony, tangibility, and storytelling. And I feel that in this small convening today on a digital platform, those are definitely the three things that you brought to us today. So thank you for sharing your work. You're in LA, so I'm hoping that we'll see you when we're more on campus and we'll see our space in real time. And do share any upcoming exhibitions, events that you're involved in here, and good luck in Glasgow.
Thank you.
They're lucky to have you.
Yeah, no, first international flight since COVID, but you know, no, it would be great. It would be great. I wish I could take a boat there, but it in this case might not be possible.
Might not. It would be a long. You'd need to get to New York and
no, but I think it. But I really did look into it. But yeah, I would have had to have left like a week ago.
So here's the last trick question: would you have been a stowaway, or would you have worked for your passage?
Whoa. Oh, both are appealing to me for different reasons. Yeah, I think I would have documented. I would have turned it into a documentary about, you know, the secret life of a I don't know. Yeah, probably stowaway is a
stowaway. I like the word stevedore a great deal as well. Like stevedore. So, well, enjoy your travels.
Thank you, Maggie.
We look forward to seeing you on the world stage again.
Wonderful. Wonderful joining you guys. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.